a very unfortunate opportunity actually 13 years ago, which gave me a lot of lessons that's very applicable for this period of time. And that is, after 10 years working for an Australian bank, I got bored. I wanted to go on an adventure, and the bank decided to dump me in Cambodia, a country that was just coming out of civil war, had almost no infrastructure, was facing a huge amount of change in a short period of time. And a lot of the incumbent knowledge and assets and infrastructure that I'd taken for granted so much in Australia just wasn't there. So we had to rethink things, rethink approaches, find new frameworks, new ways to build business models, new ways to build even business continuity. And the lessons of that that year have never been more applicable than now in this post-COVID world, when essentially everything that we've taken for granted to where we've got to today has almost been erased. I mean, and there's a number of quotes in industry today that we've accelerated digital transformation at twice the rate in the last 12 months. Remember, that means we've had more digital transformation in the last 12 months than we had in the previous decade. So that means, for instance, whether it's digitization of business, supply chains, daily life, has totally changed. And what I want to do is I want to quickly share a curve that it's not even mine. It comes from Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. Bear with me. And it's basically the innovation adoption curve. What it allows us to understand is that in the adoption of anything in society, whether it's change of a new technology, whether it's the adoption of a new behavior in society, a new business model, it actually goes through a series of phases. And that is, we have our early adopters first, they pounce on everything. They're the people who have the latest gadgets, they do the new things first. But the vast majority of the world requires the early adopter to be an example for them, so they can actually follow and actually believe that that change is possible. And so the vast majority of the world has now actually been seen and forced that the digitization of almost anything is possible. As Tim referred to before, we had governments before that would adamant that we have to have government by face-to-face. Yeah, we've been forced to do it in a remote life. We've seen more policies passed in the last 12 months. We've had emergency measures put in place without face-to-face meetings. We've had some of the largest M&A deals in history have been done in the last 12 months. And all these things that they would have insisted that has to be done face-to-face. But the interesting part for me actually is not so much what we've done through COVID, but it's how we recover from COVID. And we've all been now comfortable living in our lounge rooms or bedrooms, working from home. I think there's 1,000 memes out there of parents with kids tied up underneath the desk as they attempt to do a Zoom call. But there's also a new lifestyle that we're also adapting to, is that there was a Forbes study just a week ago that said 83% of people now have no desire to return to 9 to 5 in the office. And so that has implications at an infrastructure level, public transportation, public policy, property, as Tim referred to, or even the incentives we have to actually living at home. But the one that I'm actually watching with keen interest is actually how supply chains recover. So one of the things that a lot of the disruptors of the last decade realized, particularly those that have two-sided businesses, so I'm talking about Airbnb, Uber, where they have a supply and a demand side to their business, is actually to how do we rebuild both sides so that neither creates an adverse experience for the other. And that's the simplest one of actually what I was working on last year in Myanmar is around just an F&B. Is that if any actor in a supply chain is to grow faster or slower than its surrounding actors, its stresses can amplify during a recovery period. That could be as simple as accounts payable slipping by 7 days, or even just the available working capital during a peak season being constrained. These ripple through a supply chain and either accelerate or amplify the stresses of the recovery overall. And this is particularly evident in the trends we've seen in consumption in the last 12 months. We've seen a number of industries that are particularly those dependent on specialized manufacturing in China experience basically supply shortages, while logistics supply chains have been accelerating the actual supply. I'm a passionate cyclist, by the way, and to buy a bicycle right now anywhere in the world is almost impossible, because the global supply has been dried up. And that's changing the economics of a bicycle. Like I know thousands of marketplaces around the world today where people have unique access to either bike parts or bicycles, and scalpers are now selling those at a premium through secondhand markets like eBay, or in our part of the word, carousel. So it's opening up new opportunities. But also consumption itself has changed, because particularly for countries where we had a bias for dining out, and so Singapore is a country that has a very strong dining out culture, a lot of us got forced to change that last year. I mean, for the rest of the world is to understand that, over 80% of Singaporeans eat out every single day. This is not so much around a choice, as opposed to actually the way we live in Singapore in apartments means that for a meal, we can easily go out to a hawker center nearby and have a meal for $2 to $3 to actually sustain life and so forth. And that basically that small part of life has been taken away. And so our consumption models have changed. And as we saw, whether it be packaged goods, F&B, basic supplies have now been forced to go back into the home. And actually what's come out of it is a huge growth. And you don't have to go too far on Instagram to see that cooking is having a recovery in the last 12 months. People actually passionately finding something they want to craft, learning how to do it, and doing it at home. The biggest ones particularly were sourdough bread last year. And that's also growing on the supply chain side. So actually the companies in the supply chain of sourdough bread have seen a massive spike actually in their product demand. I myself have taken on learning to grill with steak. So I've taken on basically sourcing the best quality red meat I can find and learning the various cooking techniques, which has been my passion. And as a result, that's been obviously had a downstream impact. But consumption overall also means that this device, which has already, you can't see my virtual background, but the device that has already been our consumption preference with the various apps and ecosystems, now mean we are literally buying things more and more from home because we can't go to buy them. This has meant that, for instance, we're seeing things like centralized kitchens, more dependency on logistics ecosystems, warehousing and so forth, that have to optimize their business models in a very, very different way. But the killer, I think, in all of this was actually most evident in sort of the post-pandemic Google search trends we've seen. So for those who don't know, the kind of November through to March Google trends where the key ones were really around online shopping, online doctor, and food delivery, were the three highest trends of any topic. And this is seeing an on-flow effect in terms of how we then engage those various services. So we're seeing huge growth in digital health, particularly either the teledoctors, remote consultation in various markets around the world. And more importantly, building technology that was previously only viable in emerging markets to overcome infrastructure and distribution cost challenges, is now being pushed mainstream in a lot of digital economies. The next is, for most of us, our careers have completely changed. Working from home was either a hugely positive experience for some or a hugely challenging for a ton of others. In particular, like I know just in the pre-briefing, we're talking about setups here is post-COVID, like anyone, I had a computer and an internet connection. So pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I literally have 2 computers, 3 cameras, dual internet, so that this is my place of work. So I have to make sure that it's continuous, it's stable. If I have an emergency, I can switch over very quickly. And this is going to be a setup that has impact at a consumer device level, service provision around ISPs, but more particularly is around how do companies now cater for talent that want to work in a very different way. If 80% of their workforce doesn't want to return to the office, how do they retain, grow, or even attract the talent to sustain their businesses going forward? And for those that actually do go back to work, how does the office look different? How does the logistics of the office look different? We have different setups. We definitely have the limitations around access to the office in some countries. But how do we actually, at scale, actually ensure that our new ways of office, the way we design our offices, are set up for a post-COVID way of working that is both multimodal, multi-location, and caters for a different way of working. What's really been evident in under all of this, and for those that are really into the stock markets, is actually watching the stocks that have performed quite well in the last 12 months. Which is quite timely, because just before this call, I was watching the US airlines results announcements, and so American Airlines and Southwest were just announcing their growth coming out of mid-March, and so they're actually seeing putting 50% capacity back on, which is a good sign. But more importantly, we've seen companies last year like Netflix, like Zoom, go through absolute skyrocketing share prices, just based on simple things around market potential, around new levels of demand, flexibility of their distribution model and commercial models. Just seeing a huge shift in how investors see stocks, which even at a retail level, but means that institutional money can be changed in a very different direction to enable a whole bunch of new businesses. And we've seen, in particular, even though we've been in a remote location, we've seen more IPOs in the last 12 months than any year prior to that. And it just absolutely staggers me. And most of those are digital centric or digital native businesses. So what we're summing up is around, as we come back to the work post pandemic, is asking ourselves how we're going to survive, or even more importantly, how we're going to thrive. And so the approach that I've typically, advising my clients to do is to first start with the whys. Like, what has changed in terms of your purpose, the context of how you actually, where your business operates, where your employees operate, and understand what is the new purpose. Because for many customers and for your workforce, that purpose has changed. The next is accepting that there is a new normal. The new normal is the 9 to 5 has been essentially erased, and we have an opportunity to start with a blank slate. How do we engineer a new way of work that not only empowers our workforce, but aligns to either the values, the ethics, or even the future of our business? The next is around realizing that in a world where we have distributed ecosystems, the number one priority in 2021 will be security. Endpoint security company stocks all went up over 500% last year, purely because of the very urgent need to facilitate and secure a distributed workforce, which means we have new risks. Like, if I am here working for a regulated company or a highly data sensitive company from my home, what are the new risks that we have to consider in operations? The last thing is really that we're going through a new period, is make sure we make the effort to actually learn things before we try and set rules around them. As we move at a fast pace, we tend to try and basically impose boundaries and limitations on things, particularly on things that we don't understand. We've seen this particularly as a number of businesses had to digitize, and they've imposed either procurement or security or policy rules around technologies they just don't understand yet. But the main thing is realizing that we are living in a very dynamic world. Things could change again next week, the month after, as the recovery comes back up. So taking small incremental steps is around understanding where our market will go. Because our first principle of in a post-pandemic world is everything we had before has to be erased. We have to accept that we know nothing again. And only by separating ourselves from that pre-pandemic mindset and incumbency, we'll free ourselves up for the potentials of a post-pandemic world. We actually, from a business standpoint and a workforce standpoint, presented with an opportunity that almost no generation in history has been given. And that is an acceleration of our productivity levels, an acceleration of our economic potential, and acceleration of our choice in the way we work. But navigating those three choices is going to be a challenge across a number of industries. But the one thing I want to, there's been my hero story of the pandemic is I've got to put out there, I'm a bit of a fanboy of Tony Robbins. But if anyone has ever been to a Tony Robbins, Unleash the Power Within event, it's entrancing. He does this thing with you for 3 days that changes your life. But Tony has built a platform in a pandemic that is absolutely staggering. He is one of the few people in this industry, particularly the speaker industry, that has managed to grow his audience by almost double during the pandemic. And I encourage you, if you have the time, to go and actually have a look at his virtual stadium framework he's been setting up, where he's engaging up to 40,000 people an event from his home. Well, it's actually not his home, it's a warehouse not far from his home, but around how do we reach audiences and build businesses in a very different way. This is an individual that was paid a lot of money to get on stage, to be physically present, a business that all of us are a part of, but he's managed to reinvent himself. And I'm looking to that as an example of what's really possible in this post-pandemic world.